My friends, in 1936, Dale Carnegie wrote a book that made him a very, very wealthy man. The title was How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, it had since been published in every major language in the world and has sold millions of copies. And the popularity of the book, I suspect, lies in the fact that it recognizes and deals with a very real human need, the necessity of getting along with people. Of course, Dale Carnegie was not the first person to recognize this human need. Jesus was dealing with much the same thing recorded in today's gospel. It's really a practical lesson on how to get along with people. And Jesus knew better than anyone that this sometimes could be a very difficult thing to do. Let's face it, Jesus had problems with his family. He had problems with his co-workers. He had problems with his synagogue. That's to say that he knew the importance and understood the difficulty of interpersonal relationships. They are never easy. Sometimes those relationships are downright impossible. Well, I think that Jesus gives us some insight on the subject of how to get along with people. If someone has done you wrong, Jesus said, then you should go to them alone and talk about it, just between the two of you. Don't brood over it, don't complain about it, but go to the person and just talk about it. In other words, the key is to keep the lines of communication open. For instance, a wife is hurt by her husband, but she keeps it to herself. It happens again, and she does the same thing. Well, it keeps on until so much resentment builds up that she finally explodes and screams at him for something that he doesn't even remember. Jesus said, point out their fault. Now, let's face it, that really isn't an easy thing to do, is it? The truth of the matter is, we all have faults. Some have faults that we don't even know about. Honesty is one of the most delicate and difficult things in any relationship. You know, we're so fearful of rejection that we hide our feelings even from those we know and love. But Jesus said, if they hear you, you have won them over. He also said that if personal discussion does not resolve it, we should bring in a third party. And if that doesn't settle it, we should present it to the church. Now, what does that mean? As I see it, we should maintain an attitude of openness. Call in a counselor. Listen to an objective third party. Now, it could be that you're not entirely right about the matter. Maybe the problem is your attitude and not the other person's behavior. Now, Jesus said, when everything else fails, we should treat them as you would treat a Gentile or tax collector. Now, obviously, the only way to answer that observance is to see how Jesus treated them. With Jesus, there was no such thing as an outsider. Jesus befriended everyone. He invited everyone to be part of the kingdom of God. In fact, the gospel that I just read from was written by a former tax collector to whom Jesus said, "Follow me." Well, that pretty well expresses the philosophy of Jesus. His enemies called him the friend of tax collectors and sinners. Now, in his scheme of things, the only people who got left out were those who deliberately refused to come in. And even then, he left the door open in case they changed their minds. So the question is, how do we get along with people? We work at it. We communicate with them openly and honestly. And if that doesn't work, we leave the door open. We treat them with indestructible goodwill, just as Jesus did the Gentiles and the tax collectors.